estar en la pantalla, ¿no?
No,
hasta
estarás en pantalla todo el tiempo.
los tres vamos a estar, o los cuatro, ¿quién va a estar?
Los tres.
Y Lenin, vas a grabar, no olvides.
Sí.
I'm sitting here with two computers, three screens. I feel like I'm a big shot.
You are a big shot. I feel like a big shot because I know both of y'all.
So what's Taiwan looking like, Austin?
Well, it turns out that this whole time, me being on a missionary visa basically means that Annie can't be with me in Taiwan.
Oh, man.
And the people here at the consulate didn't realize that. And so they've been, without realizing it, basically leading me along for the last year and a half. And so the options right now are we can either do, like, I could switch to like a work visa. Thing is, I'd have to work in Taiwan for like a company and she could come, or she could become an American citizen. So we're thinking through all the options, because her becoming an American citizen would have ramifications for us getting back into
Going to
China eventually. Yeah. So,
well, Peru's
the
wide
plot
open.
thickens.
So come on down while you're waiting.
Yep.
What's so what are you thinking you're gonna do?
Still not sure. I'm
Pueden comenzar.
been talking with the immigration in Taiwan. Like, I'm going around the consulate here because they don't know what they're talking about. The problem is, it's like you send an email, and then because of the time difference, you have to like wait a day to get a response back. And
I
so
think we're getting started.
okay.
I was waiting on y'all. Well, I'd like to welcome you to a new worldwide meeting of the Society of Mentors, and just sitting here talking with David Gardner, our son, and then Austin Teal, missionary to China via Taiwan or somehow. We're not sure how yet, so they're still working on that. I'm excited about this meeting today because the absolute most important thing, I couldn't say that because there's so many important factors. You got to have your support, and you got to have your Bible knowledge, and you definitely got to be saved. So, I mean, I shouldn't say it's like the most important, but having all the basics that we understand, if you don't speak the language reasonably well, you are going to fail as a missionary. You've got to learn the language. How do we go about learning the language? So when we put this idea together, I put together Austin Teal because Austin, I always kidded him when I had classes back in the old days that he cheated, which is a great thing. It's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. I meant that as a very high compliment. He would do some things. I'm hoping he'll tell you about some of what he would do today, how he would go about that. So in other words, he took every possible road to learn that language, but he never went to formal language school. So he knows from the student's point of view, and he learned one of the more difficult languages in the world, Chinese. Now, let me just say this to you before we get started. What's the most difficult language to learn in the world? It's the one you're learning, no matter what everybody else says. And you know, it's like people like to get together and they like to decide, well, my language is harder than your language. Well, let them try yours for a while. It's just, you know, it's learning a language is just difficult. On the other side of things, my son David is going to talk to us from the language school point of view because he really knows how to operate a language school. And I feel certain that he does a better job of it than I did. When I was there, I started that language school and I ran that language school for years. And then my son Chris did, and now David. But David never learned Spanish or English any more than your children do. He just grew up in both. I think it's almost a misnomer to say this probably, but David has two first languages. My kids all learned Spanish very well, much better than their dad, mom. But David was 1 year old when he arrived in Querétaro, Mexico. And so he hadn't learned, he wasn't speaking hardly any English, so then he was speaking both of them. And so I think we have both sides of it today. And I really, really do believe that if you will listen, and I want you to feel free to ask questions. You can text me, you can email me, and we will interrupt the program because this is like the most vital one. Some of you are really struggling and it makes you think, I want to quit. I don't know if I can make it. Don't do that. There's hope. And some of you are operating the language schools. And as you operate the language school, it's in your mind, I don't mean this ugly, but maybe you don't know the best way to do that. And so our language school in Peru was based off the language school in Mexico that had been in operation over 40 years when I got there. And so I copied everything down to a T. And then David has improved it because I couldn't do some of the things that the lady in Mexico did. So sit back, get a pencil and pen. We're all helping new people learn the language. I'm excited that you are. You need to hear from both. So Austin Teal, would you give, there's two Austins and a David here, but Austin, would you give us a synopsis of how you went about learning the language, explain to him why you went to China, and then just tell us how you went about learning.
Yeah, sure thing. So I moved to China. It would have been at the end of 2010. At that point, I had already visited China a couple of times for 2 or 3 weeks each. And in the first trip to China, the Lord worked in my heart, and it was at that time that I knew that I wanted to devote my life to reaching China with the gospel. Had that second trip, kind of further cemented that desire. And so I had some exposure to the language. And then when I got there, it would have been December of 2010. I knew, like, I had signed a 1-year contract with this school that I'd be working for. I knew I had at least a year there. And I knew that I really needed to speak the language to get around, but I also knew that my ultimate goal was I wanted to be able to preach in Chinese. And I had that in the back of my mind going into it. And I know it might be super basic, and it was actually already mentioned here a bit ago, but just to kind of reiterate, it is really important to learn the language, and it's important when we communicate the gospel to communicate the gospel in the language of the people that we're preaching it to. And I think that we can even say that biblically. And just really quick, I just want to touch on this. In the book of Acts, we have a few different accounts of Paul's conversion. We know that the first instance is in Acts 9, and then there's a couple of instances there towards the end where he's reiterating how he got saved. He's sharing his testimony in front of various people. But there's this one instance in Acts 26 where he's speaking, and in verse 14, the Bible says, "And when we were all fallen to the earth, I heard a voice speaking unto me and saying in the Hebrew tongue, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks." And reading that verse, it's always jumped off the page to me that Paul would emphasize that Jesus spoke to him in Hebrew. And I've thought a little bit on that, and I find it really interesting that we have this man who we know his Greek was excellent. I mean, he kind of wrote half the New Testament in Greek. And there are other instances in Acts where they actually marvel that he speaks Greek, or they marvel that he speaks Hebrew. And yet, when Jesus spoke to him, Jesus himself chose to speak to him in Hebrew, basically what we would call today in his heart language. And And so I would say that that's even biblical precedent. That's biblical evidence for this being a pretty important thing to learn the language. And I say that I don't necessarily know what things are like in other countries or what the missions environment is in a lot of places, but I know that in China, and I've heard this about other countries, it's really commonplace for people to go and try to do all of their ministry in English. In China, it's really common for people to go and they become an English teacher. I was an English teacher for 5 years in China. And they just want to start a Bible study in their home and they do it in English with their English students, or they go to a government run church that will let them have a Bible study, so let them lead a Bible study so long as they lead it in English, et cetera, et cetera. And that always just came across as very strange to me, because you attend these Bible studies, you go to these meetings, and you can tell that for the people there, it's really more of an intellectual exercise for them. They're so busy trying to process the English that you're speaking that they're not really internalizing the truth of the message. That's not to say that they can't. That's not to say that no one's ever been saved by hearing the gospel in their second language or their third language. Obviously, that's not the case, but it is so much more effective. I mean, hey, in Acts 9, Jesus did it, and we have evidence of that. Paul testifies to that in Acts 26, that that's the language that Jesus spoke. He spoke to him in his heart language. And so having said all of that, I knew that I wanted to preach the gospel in China, and I knew that I wanted to do it in their language. I didn't want to do it in English. And so the whole time I was learning, I was constantly thinking, the goal is to preach, the goal is to preach. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I just knew that I had to take things a step at a time. And I'll confess, I've confessed this before, my first 6 months or so in China, I kind of dabbled in the language, but I really didn't get into it, mainly because I didn't know what I was doing. And I didn't have any sort of direction or guidance. There was this one guy, lost guy, American, who lived there. He worked with me. He spoke Chinese well. And he had actually read the LAMP book, Language Acquisition Made Practical. And he sat down with me a few different times and just kind of explained to me kind of how he learned to speak. And so that was kind of helping me. I guess in a very small way, he mentored me a few times. But I really didn't get it. And honestly, what it took, I would spend those first 6 months, I spent a lot of my time. I would work, I would kind of explore the new city that I was in, maybe talk to a few people here and there, but was still very afraid. And I'd go back home and I'd spend a lot of time on Skype with people back home. I would spend a lot of time on Facebook, seeing what people back home were doing, and I was living in China, but my mind was still living back home in America. And what happened, and this was in no way intentional on my part, but my VPN had something go haywire on it about 6 months into my 1-year subscription. And it would occasionally work. So, in China, you can't access a lot of Western social media sites. And once that VPN that allowed me to do that was having a lot of issues, I couldn't just be at home and scroll through Facebook and do things like that all the time. I had to find something else to do. And so I really, at that point, started to lean into, now I need to learn Chinese.
All right. I think this is great. The heart language point is very well taken. And please don't do English ministry is well taken. I don't think there's anything wrong with you having a side English ministry, but it's pretty hard to dedicate yourself to two things. And so I hope that each of you that are listening will work at learning the language and then dealing with the people. I had a basic rule. I don't think David needs this rule, but I wouldn't hardly deal with you in English. And the reason was because I knew that my Spanish would always struggle. I would never be as good in Spanish as I wanted to be. Therefore, when somebody asked me, would you do something with us in English? I was always like, yeah. And I tried to get out of it. They wanted me to teach English classes. I didn't want to do it. Not that it's wrong, it's just that I don't have natural language ability at all. And I had to struggle. I don't hear well. I don't even know where my tongue is in my mouth. So in language school, they considered me a dingbat. So I just hope you will really work at learning a language. Now, David, I'm going to hit y'all both up with questions, and they both sent in great notes. And I'd like y'all to send those to Lauren Grant, if you would. She can add those into the notes that will be attached to this, if y'all would do that later. But I've already got a bunch of questions coming in, and so but I want to, David, what would you say scares you about how language schools are being led sometimes?
I think a lot of times we don't think it's that big of a deal. Like, just give me the books and we'll just teach them the books and that'll be enough. And so there's a lot behind it. You really don't know what you're getting yourself into when you decide that you want to run a language school. And so you don't really give it a whole lot of time. You hire, teachers that aren't really, they really don't even know their own language, or they're not even studious. One of the things that we try to do is when we hire somebody, we try to hire somebody that's actually been to college, at least for a few semesters, because they've been educated a little bit more in the language and stuff. And so I think a lot of times what scares me about language school is that there's really not a seriousness to it. It's not really, there's not much structure. There's not much requirement. There's not many expectations. It's just kind of a, well, just get us the books and you'll figure it out. I figured it out, so I'm sure you'll figure it out. So there's not much of a road, a path, and it's just kind of like, let's wing it. And so can you learn the language like that? Absolutely. Austin Till is a clear example of that, right? You can learn the language, but it's going to be a lot harder to come by. It's going to be a lot harder to come by. And there's
even according to Austin's own testimony a second ago, at first he didn't know what he was doing. He needed that other guy to mentor him. Language school can fill that gap, because
right.
you are the one, you're going to learn the language. It's you that's got to learn the language. The language schools don't teach the language. They give
right.
to it. Go ahead.
Language school kind of give you the environment and the structure in order for you to learn. So it'd be kind of being put in a greenhouse kind of thing. Like everything's at your disposal for you to be able to learn. And so, when you look at it, language school for us is from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And it's 20 hours a week. So it's not really a whole lot of time. Honestly, it's not a lot of time. And if you only do language school, then you're not going to learn the language very well. But in those 20 hours, you kind of get a structure and get an idea for when you go out in the afternoon, when you go to church, when you hear a sermon, etc., that you kind of get an idea of, oh, this is how, this is how that's done. This is how that's said. Oh, this is why, they are saying it like that. And so it kind of gives you a foundation to work off of.
Okay, so from here on out, we'll let David say some more about the language school, but Austin and David, I'd just like the three of us to have a conversation. I think it's more interesting to people than a flat out lecture. And so I'd like y'all to question each other and talk to each other. But let's go to you. I'm going to ask y'all questions unless y'all and you jump off on any tirade you want at any time. But
Well,
also,
actually, in that case, if I may, just kind of hearing what David just said, I would just add that I really do think that it's important to have that guidance and mentorship. It's something that I had very, very little of. And I think that it does help to fast track the process. Because it probably took me 2 years to get comfortable speaking Chinese. And I jokingly say this, but it's true. It took an extra year for people to be comfortable listening to my Chinese. And I feel
think I'm
like
still working on to get comfortable with my Spanish, but I got you.
I feel like had I been in some kind of like language school system, whatever that would have been, whether at a university or some other kind of setup with a tutor, it would have been much quicker and my pronunciation would probably be better.
Yeah, and I think that something to keep in mind is that both settings complement each other. And so can you learn a language? Can you learn Chinese or Spanish all by yourself, with no language school or anything? Yes, absolutely. Can you do that? Yes. Can you learn a language in a language school? Yeah, you can do that. But both of them have their deficiencies on their own. Both of them have their strengths on their own, but really they both complement each other. And so, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the goal of this meeting is, kind of give the idea of, all right, we need a language school. You need that structure, but you also need that practice out in the streets and learning how to, learn the language on your own as well.
Exactly. Now, what I want to do, you can, again, anytime you want to say anything you want to, but I'm getting quite a few good questions here. And so I want to ask them. And since Austin, David just spoke, you answer first, and then David, you come back in right after that. What are the roles of language school in practice, Austin?
I would say that language school, I guess that's supposed to be two categories. So what's the role of language school and what's the role of practice? That's my assumption hearing the question. So I would say the role of language school is to give you a little bit of mentorship. So you would have the mentorship from, I guess, the veteran missionary, and then also the language school teacher, being able to kind of guide you maybe with, okay, here's a set of vocabulary to be working on, or here's a task that you need to get your level, you need to raise your level in this area so that you're able to complete this task or what have you. So it gives some guidance. But then practice is, you just got to go out and talk, and you have to go out and say stuff, and you have to be inquisitive and ask questions. And honestly, I tell you, it's been really neat for me now that I do speak two languages. And then in our house, Abraham is growing up learning to speak both. Just watching him as he learns either one, it doesn't matter. But just knowing what I know about learning a language, it's like kids ask some weird questions sometimes. And sometimes I'm able to kind of pinpoint when he asks a question, he's not really fishing for the information. He's fishing for the word. And he wants to know what the word is for something. I'll say something and a few seconds will go by and he'll point to it, the thing I was just talking about. And he'll say, "Daddy, what's that?" And it's like, "Buddy, we were just talking about it." But he's not really wanting to know what it is. He knows what it is. He just needs to know the word for it. And that's how we need to be when we learn the language. We just have to have that kind of inquisitive mindset of like, okay, I know there's thousands upon thousands of words out there that I don't know. And I just need to go out and practice and put myself in situations where I will use those words. Because if it's just like sitting one-on-one with a tutor and going back and forth, yeah, that's practice in some ways, but it's how much better to go out and just kind of throw yourself in the randomness of life, where new words, new phrases, new situations crop up and you have to deal with those. And so I would say language school would be a good, like kind of like guardrails, a good guide for you. And then you have to be self-motivated to go out and to practice and to just put yourself out there.
David?
Yeah, I would say that, no, I did not learn a language per se, but I think one of the big problems is that, when you try to understand a certain tense, it's not just past, present, and future. I had somebody tell me on furlough just recently. He said, Spanish is easy, everything, or no, they told me that about English, I think. They said English is easy. It's all present tense. Like everything's present tense. That's all there is. And it's like, there's way more than present tense. There's way more than past, present, and future. There's all kinds of different tenses. There's all kinds of different conjugations. The fact is that if you don't have language school, a lot of times you'll never understand grammar. And you might be able to afford that in English because you speak it naturally. but in another language, it'll be a crutch for the rest of your life, and you'll make grammatical mistakes that a national person will not make because you don't understand why or how it's being said. And the other thing is that that because of those mistakes, I mean, you're going to say native English speakers say that is more better. You know, you would go, we don't say that. And you know, when they say, well, why not? You know, well, you don't even know how to explain it, and he doesn't know how to understand it. And you go, you just don't say it, right? You never say more better. Or you don't never say like more happiest. Like we don't say that. And so those kind of things, like you need the language school. I mean, you know, when we're looking at our language school here, I mean, you know, they'll be trying to go through future tense or past tense or something like that for, you know, a month at a time, 2 months at a time, trying to get a hold of, you know, a certain tense. And so, you know, like Austin said, I think the language school does that part of it, but at the same time, practice, you can't disconnect culture from language. Like you can't learn a language without learning culture. You can't learn culture without learning a language. Like both of those go hand in hand. And so what Austin said was just throw yourself out there in the randomness of life is a big deal. There's somebody that could finish all of language school and I could take them downtown and they wouldn't understand a word of what's going on. And the reason is because, you know, I've heard this mentioned many times is that, you know, when you learn a language in a certain context and in a certain setting, it's like your brain is going down a highway. And as long as your brain is going down that highway and you don't change the subject and you don't change the topic and you don't use words that are outside of the vocabulary and you go at the speed that you're expecting to go, everything's fine. But the minute you turn off of a side road, you know, and you go one block over, you're completely lost. Like you have no clue what you're saying. And so part of practice is, all right, let's throw you out there. You know, so I had a missionary just recently tell me, you know, my language school teacher was going to help me buy these, you know, water filters or something like that, or a water hose. And he said he would, I told him, let's go to this, you know, department store, like a, you know, like a Home Depot that we've got right across the street from his house, literally a few blocks. It would have taken him 10, 15 minutes to go get it, come back. It all would have been done. But his language school teacher was like, no, they charge over double there. Let's go somewhere else. And the missionary told me, he's like, man, I just thought it was a waste of time. And I said, no, it wasn't, because that took you completely out of your comfort zone. Took you completely out of your comfort zone. You did pay cheaper and it took longer, but you were around a Peruvian for longer. You were listening to other conversations. There was a lot of, you know, commotion going on. It was just like the typical street vendor. And because of that, it kind of gives you that practice. It gives you that practice of getting out there. And so really what I've told people is anything that includes Spanish is practice. So you go to lunch with somebody, that's practice. You watch Spanish TV, that's practice. You go play soccer with somebody, that's practice. You go, I mean, really, it's really easy to get your practice hours in if you just literally, you're just not home. You just don't go home. And you're going to be fine. You're going to get that practice in, and you need that. If you don't have that, you'll never be able to understand not only the language but also the culture.
All right, we got. I want to throw in some things here, and I wish you'd write these down, guys. Language is best learned like you learned it naturally as a child. You start by listening. You listen for 9 months in the womb, and then you listen for a year to 2 out of the womb before you really do a lot of talking. Then you talk. And you talk poorly, and it's a bunch of babble, and people correct you. And then you learn how to read, and then you learn how to write. And so in our language school, when I went to language school, the first quarter, we were every day turning a report of how we listened for the vowel A and how they use that to sound. Another day would be the vowel E. Another day it'd be the double L or the Y sound. And so you were always listening. And so I had to write a note and say, and I had to turn it in all 5 days. I listened to a TV program called So-and-so. I listened to children talking in the park. I listened to church service. And I had to write it down and say, I focused on this. And we did that for a quarter. And then after that, I had to say, the next quarter, I'd say, I spent this time talking to people, and then so on. And I won't go any further on that just for the sake of time. And then let me say this to you. Language school and practice go hand in hand. Because in language school, you learn a series, like if you're in Spanish and you're 3 or 4 lessons in, you probably learn 10 or 15 basic sentences, questions and statements. My name is, what is your name? What time is it? Where do you live? You've learned those, go out and practice those. Go out and practice those. Spend time practicing those with the people you're going out to be with. And that would be our point. Next question, guys. David, you start, and then Austin. How do language school and practice differ, and what is each one shooting for?
Yeah, I think language school is going to be very structured and safe. That's how I could say it. Language school is structured. Language school is safe. Language school is easy. Language school is a controlled environment. And practice is chaotic. Practice is not a controlled environment. Practice is not safe, and so basically you're out there, by yourself, and it's just kind of a, being thrown into the pool kind of thing. And so I think it would be a lot very similar to playing sports, so if you were to, do basketball practice or soccer practice, you're going to be, practicing your shots. You're going to be practicing your dribble with your right hand, your dribble with your left hand. You're going to be, guarding people and all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden you get thrown into a game. And when you get thrown into the game, it is just use what you've got, use what you learn, and just figure it out on the way. And so, without practice, you're not going to get better in the game, but without the game, you're not going to get better at playing. And so, one's very controlled and easy. The other one's very chaotic and uncontrolled and difficult.
Austin?
Okay, so yeah, I really like what David just said. And so how about this? I'll share a story to illustrate the chaos of practice. So back in the day in China, before WeChat and all their more modern social media stuff, they had this, it was basically their version of AOL Instant Messenger called QQ. And so after about 6 or 8 months in China, I got a QQ account. And that was about the same time that I started teaching part-time at a university there. So I had my main job at this children's school, but I was also teaching at a university. And I gave my QQ account information, like my handle or whatever, to my students, not realizing that not only would they have it, but they were going to basically pass it all around the school. So all of a sudden, like, I would get home every day and I would just have this barrage of messages on my computer, a lot of them in English, people wanting to practice English with me, but then a lot of them in Chinese. And I assumed that they're all my students. And so anyway, it was good Chinese practice for me and all of that. And we would just chat about random stuff, and it would give me an opportunity to kind of see the characters come through, figure out which characters I knew and didn't know, and look them up and all that sort of thing. Well, one day there was this one guy who started sending me these messages in Chinese. And my assumption was that he was this guy, and I had this one class that I taught at the university that was much larger. It had like 60 students in it, and they weren't English major students. For some reason, they had to have this English class for part of their whatever other degree. And I assumed that this guy was in that class. He told me in Chinese, like, I don't really speak much English, but I'd love to get to know you or whatever. I'd love to have you come and visit me in my hometown sometime. Would that work? And I said, yeah, sure, that'd be great. Thinking that he probably speaks a pretty good bit of English. He just doesn't want to type it out or whatever. So we agree on a day, we agree on a time. I show up at the university at this spot, and he's there, and I don't recognize this guy at all. He is not in that class, and he just got my QQ handle from somebody else there at the school. He is a student at the university. I had never seen him before at all. But I thought, okay, whatever, let's do this. And I had only been speaking Chinese for maybe a year at this point, or I'd been living in China for maybe a year, learning more intently for about 6 months. And he said, all right, we're going to rent a car and we're going to drive an hour or two. We're going to get this driver to drive us an hour or two out and go to my hometown, and you can meet my friends and stuff. And I'm just like, okay, whatever, let's do this. So we go, and it's a really awkward ride because he doesn't speak any English, and I mean, my Chinese is fumbling, and I'm like, I mean, this guy could like just kidnap me and dispose of my body, and no one would know where I was or anything. But whatever, let's go. And so we go. We get to his hometown, and he wants me to meet this buddy of his, and they want to take me to the steak restaurant, which was not a steak restaurant at all. It was like, if you've ever had quote unquote steak in China, it's just like really thin, like ox meat stuff that's not really all that good. But they were really trying to impress me and stuff with their knowledge of refined Western culture. And so while we're eating at this steak restaurant, his friend, so this is a friend of a guy that I thought was my student, but isn't my student. This friend says, I would love for you to come to my wedding. And I'm like, wait, what? And he's like, yeah, you should come to my wedding. And I was like, he's like, yeah, it'd be really great if you were like, in China, Chinese weddings, they have these people called hosts. Since they don't have religious weddings, they just have like a person who's like the MC of their wedding or whatever. He wanted to be like it. He wanted me to be like an MC of his wedding. And I was like, I don't know, like, why? And the whole time I'm thinking, why am I even here? Well, then he like invites me to his house, and it was weird because I go into his house and there's pictures of this guy who wants me to be in his wedding, dressed up in a tuxedo with this lady in a wedding gown. And I'm thinking, well, according to the picture, they're already married, but he's asking me to be the MC at his wedding. Like, what is up with this? Like, I don't get it. And I'm like racking my brain. And it turns out that in China, you get your engagement pictures taken in tux and bridal gown months before your wedding. And so that was kind of part of the confusion. I did not go to his wedding. I did not MC his wedding. I decided never to go back to that place again because the whole experience was just really awkward. But it really threw my Chinese into the deep end. And it was one of those moments where I was thinking, here I am 2 hours from at least people that I know in China, and no one really knows where I am. None of the people that I know where I am. It's really just the Lord knows where I am. And this is like, it was a whole day event too. It was just weird, and it was messy, but it was, I don't know that I necessarily learned a whole lot of new Chinese words or whatever that day, but I got a lot of practice in, and it, in my mind, at least solidified that like, it's okay to take risks in the language as far as like just stepping out there and going somewhere and doing something for the sake of practice and making friends and hanging out with them.
I personally think that what you did there though, Austin, I think very few language schools will do that. And I think that's a massive mistake. I think what you did there was good. It let you get around culture, let you get around language. It was a shock to your system. So I think it's great. Go ahead, David.
No, I was going to say, it's extremely easy to get comfortable in language school. It doesn't take more than a couple of weeks because you start with your language school teacher. You have people around you. You go to the same environment. It's a controlled environment. And all of that. And so, people get very comfortable in language school very quickly.
They're paid to be nice to you.
Yeah, and they're paid to be nice to you. And here's the other thing is you quickly start understanding them, and they quickly start understanding you. And so it's like, when you can understand your toddler and nobody else can, that's what they are doing with you. And that when the toddler can understand mom and nobody else, that's what you're doing with them. And so I've seen, when you see a missionary and I tell them, hey, why don't you go with this pastor? Like, we've had one missionary that's traveled a lot with some national pastors. And, the first time was like, why don't you travel with this pastor? Why don't you go with this pastor? And you're going to go like 4 hours away. And the minute you say it, it's like, oh, okay. Like, but there's nobody going to be there to hold my hand. Like, there's nobody going to be there to, and you can see just the wheels turning, and then they get comfortable with it and then they travel. But it's always extremely uncomfortable. And one of the big things about practice that I believe is that you are constantly needing to push yourself to get out of your comfort zone. So you have to push yourself out of your comfort zone. And something that I mentioned in language school here is that, at the beginning, your comfort zone is very small, extremely small. It takes nothing to get out of your comfort zone. greeting a person in church can be enough to get out of your comfort zone. But little by little, your comfort zone grows. And then you live in a bubble where now I can go to church and I'm comfortable. I can go to language school and I'm comfortable. And I can go to my favorite restaurant and I'm comfortable. And so now you have to push yourself even harder and go even further, go further places outside of the city, go to new places, have different conversations, have new conversations, talk about, toilets and sewage and pipes that you've never used those words before. Talk about airplanes, talk about helicopters. You're using all these other conversations. And so, the longer you're in language school, the longer you're learning the language, the harder it is to push out of those comfort zones. And you're going to have to push through and get out of those comfort zones if you really want to learn the language.
I totally agree with that. I think that if I could challenge you, get out of the comfort zone and get your wife a place where she can be comfortable and not afraid at home. And then you go and you get out of that. All right, now here's another. I got so many questions we will not get through. What should weekly practice look like? Go ahead, Austin. What do you got?
I apologize. Sorry.
I think you just have to, I think practice has to be practical. The words even sound similar, but it's true. Like your practice has to be practical. So you need to think, what are the tasks that I need to accomplish this week or today? And think, well, I need to figure out how to say that in Chinese or in Spanish or in whatever. And so what I did now, we kind of say that I didn't have language school, but in a sense, I kind of did. I had a subscription to this audio service called Chinese Pod, where they had like what they call like modular lessons about different topics. And so they had like different difficulty level podcasts about different things. So like it'd be a podcast about getting your hair cut, or a podcast about ordering a plate of fried rice, or a podcast about talking about your family back in your home country, or a podcast about, going to the bank and making a withdrawal or something like that. And it was all pretty easy to search and find stuff. So what I would do is I would every night I would sit down and I would rack my brain. What are things that I need to do tomorrow? Do I need to go to the bank? Do I need to, do I want to order pizza, but do it in Chinese? If I wanted to order pizza, how would I say half and half? How would I say the different toppings? And they would usually on this website have a podcast that would maybe not have the exact things that I wanted, but would be a good step in the right direction. So I would download a podcast or two about getting my hair cut, and I'd download them, I'd put them on my phone, and I'd wake up the next morning. And I had this thing where every morning I would get up, I'd walk a mile or two across town. They had this mountain. I'd walk up some steps on the side of the mountain, and they had a boardwalk that went all the way around it. And then I'd go to the mountain, walk up, walk around the boardwalk, come back down, walk back home. It'd take me an hour or two in the morning to do that. And the whole time I'm doing it, I have these 2 or 3 podcast episodes that might be 10 or 15 minutes a piece. I would just have them on repeat the whole time, listening to how those people would say it. And then there would be an explanation for the lower difficulty levels. There'd be like an English explanation for what they were talking about. For the advanced level, it would just in Chinese, they were explaining what they were talking about. But it would kind of help me. We mentioned a second ago about how listening is the most important, because kids listen for 9 months in the womb and then a year or two outside of the womb before they really ever start speaking. And so that was my way to listen a lot about something before I put myself out there and started talking about it. But then that day I would say, okay, well, I've listened about getting a haircut, so I need to go get a haircut, and I need to pray that I don't walk out with a mohawk or something weird. Pray that I can communicate what kind of haircut I want. And I do that with a lot of stuff. So like going to the bank, or, ordering a pizza, or, there would even be like episodes about things like going shopping or buying groceries or different things like that. And just like everything, I would listen to the words and kind of the sentence structures, and then I'd go out and I'd practice.
That is, can y'all hear me?
Mm.
Okay, I changed my screen up on my TV, which helps me look better at my camera. But anyway, I think that's excellent. I think that is exactly what we want to do, Austin. I think every tool you can come up with is great. Now, when you're talking about practice, it's already been mentioned by David a minute ago, but it's true. But you get to count church as practice, but don't hang around and talk to the English people in English. You get to talk, you get to count going to the restaurant, but don't grunt and point. Austin might tell you in a second about some of his, what I call cheating. And I would say, I want you to do this at the restaurant. You've already learned you want number 4, and you can grunt and go 4, but that's not what you want to do. You want to go in and say, well, I want to talk to you today about what else here? What's this? And you get them to describe all that, and you can still order number 4, but you're putting yourself in a discussion. And I think that'll help you. So playing soccer, going to buy a hose pipe, going with somebody, or going by yourself. But don't just go in. One of the beautiful things about what Peru used to be like was that you couldn't really go in the store and buy things. You have to go to a counter and tell them, I want that. And when you told them that, I remember one of my buddies, he was trying to order popcorn. And every country has a way to order popcorn. And so he looked at them and he said he wanted what he thought was popcorn, and they brought him an ear of corn. And he said, no. And then he goes, and so they brought him some coffee. And so finally they brought him some popcorn, but it took him 30 minutes. That's good English practice or Spanish practice. And so everything you do.
The sad thing about all of that. The sad thing about all of that is popcorn in Spanish is pocor.
in Peru,
I'm sorry.
in Mexico is palomitas.
Still close.
So close. Not at all. Or in Peru, a peanut is a maní, and in Mexico it's a cacahuate. So anyway, all right, let me give you another question that you guys can jump on. These are great questions. What are some mile markers and tests I can use to be sure I'm on pace in learning the language in day-to-day life and in ministry? What have you got?
A big one for me, and I don't know how excited I should have gotten about this, but it was really exciting for me, was the first time I dreamed in Chinese. I mean, I don't remember if I literally went out and celebrated or not, but I remember at least wanting to. It was a big deal where I was dreaming, and the conversation I was having in the dream was in Chinese, and people were understanding me. I was understanding the people, and I woke up and I could remember all of that. That was huge for me.
And that was a dream, because they all understood us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would say that you've got to be very careful.
What'd you say, David?
I'm sorry, I think my internet's a little slow. I would say to be very careful with how you measure yourself, because language is not something that you can find huge mile markers with and be like, okay, I crossed this threshold. A lot of the time, you're going to cross that threshold and then move back. And it's going to be like one day you're going to be like, I understood everything in the conversation. And you're going to be very thankful and excited about that. And then the next day you're going to have a conversation, you're not going to understand a thing. I heard the story of one of our missionaries that went to language school here, and he said after a year and a half, he sat down, or maybe it was a year and a half or 2 years, he sat down with 2 or 3 of our church members, and they had this whole hour and a half long conversation. And he said he did not understand a thing that whole day. And he said he went home and cried, but today he's already planted a church and he's preaching, and and a week before that or a week after that, he probably understood everything. And so a lot of times those thresholds are very difficult to find. I would try to find small victories. I understand more words. I have more vocabulary. I have more vocabulary. I can speak in a full sentence. I can say this sentence, I understood that sentence. Those that should be something that you're constantly like trying to pay attention to and be like, oh, I didn't understand that last week, but I understood it this week. I didn't, so just try to, small victories would be a big deal. Small victories would be a big deal. And,
I do
and,
think that,
you're
that
never going to
dreaming-
cross this one.
Go ahead, David. I cut you. I didn't mean to. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I really think my internet's real slow right now, but, no, I think there's also something else that you need to understand is that you're never going to stop learning the language. This is a lifetime endeavor. And so, I'm 36. I've been in the ministry for a while now. I've known the language since I was 2, but I'm constantly learning things about Spanish and English. I'm constantly learning new vocabulary and new things. And so, one of the really frustrating parts is when you hear a language school student that says that they've been in language school for, a year, and they go, man, I'm never going to learn Spanish. And it's like, no, but you've learned it for the past year. You just had a conversation with somebody. I just watched you have a conversation with somebody. And I think one of the reasons is because they've got this mental barrier where they're thinking one day I will get to that threshold. One day I'm going to get there. And one day I'm going to know everything. And one day you're not. And that's the frustrating part, is that if you think that you're going to get there and you never get there, that's a very frustrating place to be. And so, learning the language is a lifetime endeavor. Language school and practice is going to give you enough tools to where you will be able to learn the rest of your life.
So I do think dreaming is so much fun. The day you wake up, you dream. The day you're in the day that you're in the store and you're on this aisle and there's people on the other aisle talking, and you go, I think I'm understanding those people. The day the waiter doesn't have to ask you 5 times. But David is so right. You're not going to learn this language. I'll be honest with you. I always felt a little uncomfortable. I always thought to myself, I hope I'm doing a good job. Now I tend to beat up on myself a lot, but I would tell you that it's not, you just don't wake up one day and know it. Some people are like, I'm going to know it. Well, I got cancer and I had to go in and talk to the doctors. They don't even, first off, everything's in centimeters. What in the world? Now, I got used to meters and kilograms, kilos, but centimeters, I never really got used to those, especially when we're talking about something that's in my gut. Then there's an oncologist, a nephrologist, and there's all these words. So I think you want to remember that you're not just going to get easy with it. What should the schedule of a language learning look like? Specifically, someone with a family. How do we use our 60 hours of work a week? Either one of you, who wants to go first?
I'll go if you don't mind.
Go
Is that
ahead.
okay, Austin?
Sure.
Well, so, you've got really 40 hours is almost, you can get that easy. So what you're doing with language school is going from 9 to 1. So that's 20 hours out. Okay. Now you got 40. Sunday morning, you've got Sunday school and church. That's 2 hours. You show up an hour early and stay an hour late. That's 4 hours. Now you're up to 24 hours. If you come to church in the evening, that's 2 to 3 hours. So now you're up to 27 hours. Midweek service, that's another 3 hours. Now you're up to 30 hours. So now all you only need is 10 hours. If you take somebody out to lunch on a Sunday afternoon after church and go to lunch with a national, you're looking at another 2 to 3 hours. If you're, I've got one church member that if you go to lunch with him, it's going to be at least a 4-hour ordeal. And so now you're up to 33 hours. Getting to 40 is going to be very easy. If you go to lunch or invite people to lunch in your home 2 or 3 times a week, you're up to 40. You hit 40 and that's easy. I think, outside of that, I recommend people at our language school to watch Spanish television 30 minutes to an hour a day for 5 days a week. There's 5 hours, now you're up to 45 hours. You go to the youth meeting, that's another 3 hours, that's 48 hours. You go out, 2 or 3 times a week to go meet somebody and talk. Now you're up to, 50 hours. Really something that, I always heard my dad say was, language school ought to be fun. It ought to be the funnest time of your life. And so really, I have very little expectations when it comes to the missionaries about what they do, in the sense of, as long as you're around Spanish, I'm cool with it. And so, sometimes they'll go play soccer. They'll go play soccer late in the evening after church. There's 3 or 4 more hours. Now, is that straight up practice of sitting there and talking? No, but you hear a whole lot of words on a soccer court that you're not going to hear elsewhere.
And you might not ought to hear them, but anyway, they're fun.
You'll learn what not to say, but you'll hear them say stuff like sube, 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 and that means come up, come up, come up, and you'll hear that a million times. And I've had so many language school students come to me and go, "What in the world does sube mean?" And I tell them, and they never forget it because it was repeated a million times at a soccer game. There's so many. Go ahead.
That is just excellent. What you're hearing right now is it's excellent. And see, so language school will be a blast. It ought to be fun because it's people. It's not academic. It's social. It's people. And so, sube, good. Alberto would look at me and yell foul. And I looked at him, I was like, "What are you saying?" Then he'd tell me I hit him, or the ball was out. And I didn't understand out. And then he would walk over and he'd take his racket and he'd tap the line and then he'd put the ball on the outside. He'd look at me and he'd say, "Out." And I'd go, "Oh, okay, I didn't get that. But you know what? I did next time." It's just have fun. You guys that turn language school into torture, Lord help me, I'd kill myself. I don't blame you. Take somebody, go see the city. Anyway, go ahead. Austin, you give some ideas.
Yeah,
Dave wasn't finished.
let me just finish with this. You think, well, how do I get to have people around me? How do I get people around me, or how do I get to be around people in practice? Let me say this in the best way possible: is take advantage of who you are. Take advantage of your whiteness, take advantage of your Americanness, and use that, because people love, like, the idea of, man, I'm going to teach an American about my country, and I'm going to take them to my area of town, which an American would never go to. And if you ask them, teach me, show me, Peruvians, at least Peruvians would be like, man, this is the coolest thing. I get to take this person, I get to take them around, I get to show them, they're going to learn my country, I'm going to teach them, culture. And so they get excited about it. And so take advantage of what you are. You're the guy that sticks out like a sore thumb, and I can't remember Austin Till's nickname in China, but it had something to do with a big white panda. Right. And because of that, you stick out, and people want, to be around you. So it's not very, honestly, if you try, it's not very difficult to make friends when you are a foreigner, if you really try, because you are going to be the unique one out of everybody. No matter how much you don't want to be, you're going to be unique. And so you need to take advantage of that and let them take you around, show you, teach you.
Go ahead, also. I got more, but go ahead.
Yeah, that's all really great. Just to kind of reiterate that, don't be shy about sending one person, 2 people, 5 people a text message and say, "Hey, let's go hang out. Let's grab a bite to eat, or let's go get coffee." Or, I had my first or maybe my second year, I asked a guy to go with me to a Buddhist temple and kind of explain different stuff to me. And while I was there, they were explaining, I got to talk to some monks.
That's very good.
Got to have this guy show me different things. Just anything, have them explain like proper tea culture. How do you make the tea? How do you pour the tea? How do you do this? I had this guy teach me Chinese chess. Just all kinds of different things. Have fun with it. Just do what they do. So like in Latin America, yeah, soccer, great. In China, there are people that play soccer, not near as much. And so there it's going to be maybe ping pong, or maybe it's going to be like my thing was I would go and I would shoot pool with guys. And I would just have to learn, like, because they don't call them solids and stripes in China. They call them colors and patterns. And so, but then the word for pattern is really the word, they actually technically call it colors and flowers, but the word flower doubles as the word for pattern. And so they would say, like, hit the flower ball. And I was like, flower ball, really? Like, what does that even mean? And like, it took me a while to realize flower means pattern, and it's a pattern on it. It's not a solid color. But you learn all this stuff just by hanging out with people and doing stuff with them, and making it fun.
This is excellent. When I was in China, I was down at the park in Dalian, and the ocean was right there, and a bunch of old men were popping bull whips. So I stood there and I watched them, and then I clapped for them. And then I went over to him and I went, "Hey," in English, I went, "How you do that?" And he looked at me and talked to me in Chinese. And the next thing I know, I have it in my hand. He's got his hand on my hand, and they're sitting there teaching me how to do it. And it was fun. And see, you think, well, I didn't learn subjunctive, but don't let language school be a burden. Let language school be the biggest fun you ever had in your life. You get to know people. Don't let your American sensibilities cause you to get your feelings hurt. Like in Peru, they're going to pick whatever's different about you, and that'll be your nickname. There are guys whose nickname in Peru is Big Ears. They'll just say, "Here comes Big Ears. Hey, Big Nose, you want to go play? Me and Big Ears are going." Big feet, big belly. I mean, they talk about the color of the hair. They have a sambo. They just have, David, you can tell them if I'm telling the truth there.
No, my nickname is a white peeled piece of corn. I've had that nickname since I was about 8. And so.
And you don't get upset about it.
No, I did. I used to, but I got over it. God's given me victory. Something that I would mention is, one of the rules that I live by, and I think that any language learner needs to live by, is never do anything alone. Never do anything alone. And so Austin Till said that just a minute ago. He said, don't be afraid to text 4 or 5 people and go, "Hey man, want to go get this, want to go get that." Honestly, if my wife was sick and asked me to go get groceries for her, I'd call somebody and go, "Hey man, you want to go hang out? Hey man, you want to go hang out? Like, you want to go buy groceries with me?" And you go, "Well, what in the world are we going to do buying groceries?" "Oh, believe me, you will learn. You will learn." He'll look at you and go, "You're an idiot for buying at this store. This store is the most expensive store in town. I'm taking you somewhere where you can spend half as much, and they sell better stuff."
Why are you buying it in a can when you can buy it fresh?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, like, you're going to learn. So never do anything alone, and don't be afraid. See, I think one of the problems is that we think that when we go to the mission field, we're the great white hope. And so we can't be needy, and we can't ask for help. And, I'm not here to be helped. I'm here to help. And believe me, by the time you end your missionary career, you will learn that these people, your people, have helped you and taught you more than you've ever done for them. You've given them the gospel, but man, they've been there for you and they've helped you. And so don't be afraid to be needy. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I've grown up all of my life hearing the story of Alberto Romero and how he helped my dad. And I could tell you that, if there wasn't an Alberto Romero, there might not be the ministry that there is here in Peru, because he completely invested in my dad. And the Austin Gardner that I know is the preacher and the church planner, but the Austin Gardner in language school was sitting outside of a sports store sewing up soccer balls, and so that's a different story. Alberto invested in him. So it's okay for you to be needy. It's okay for you to have people there for you and have people there to help you, because that's what you need. And so it's okay to be needy. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay for ask people, and it's okay to not know. It's okay to say, I don't know where to go. Could you please take me? I'm an idiot. I'm stupid. Please help me. And I promise that will push your language further than anything else.
That people help needy people. And I
Yeah.
think that is great. Let me throw this in real quick. My wife texted me, don't know if you want to say anything about husbands thinking that their wives aren't doing anything that they are, everything they are. Wives should learn the language, but the husband will be the one preaching one day. Wives should not feel bad about taking care of their husband and children. Definitely not saying they shouldn't practice and learn. So I was gone from home all day by myself with, and that man that David just mentioned, he calls me on a regular basis and he fusses at me. The other day he called and he said, is there something wrong with your phone? He said, my phone can get you, but your phone don't seem to be able to get me. And and I learned the language in 1987 and David was 2 and most of y'all were pretty young. So Betty didn't go out with me, but she had a lady in the house taking care of her. She came in one day and she'd given our maid the key to the house. And the maid was at home taking care of David while the children were in school, the older children, and we were in language school. And Betty got home and she goes, she says to the maid, she says, I want the key. And the maid looked at her and said, no, I don't have it. And Betty couldn't understand. So Betty came up to the office where I was working and she said, she won't give me the key. And I said, well, what word are you using for key? And Betty goes, egg. And I said, so you're asking her for an egg and you want her to give you a key? And so Betty goes downstairs and says, I want a key. And the lady slaps and hands her the key. So she learned the language in a different way than I learned it, but she learned it well. And that's what you want to do. All right. If you guys want to say anything else, you can. I got more questions. Here's the next question. How do we use the time in church services and other activities to learn more about language and practice?
What I did was I bought a Chinese hymnal, the same type of hymnal that was used at the church there that I was attending. And because what I quickly realized is up until that point, all of the Chinese characters that I was learning were all related to reading signs, all related to reading menus, all related to reading just like text messages. I had not yet really learned many like Bible theology type words. And so it was really helpful for me to, I had a Chinese Bible, and then to have this hymn book and to just in my free time, just go through it and figure out, okay, what is this character? And there were there's a lot of characters in Chinese, or enough to make it significant where they have different, they have multiple pronunciations. And they would pronounce it a certain way when they were singing, but they'd pronounce it a different way when they were talking. And I was trying to figure all that out. And so just things like that, buying a hymnal and just kind of going through it was really helpful for me. And then just
Very
talking
good.
to people, getting to know them, listening to messages, trying to take notes on different words that were said and stuff.
Extremely good. David?
I would recommend a couple of things. One, sit with a Peruvian. If you're married, I recommend not sitting with your wife.
Do not do that. Do not sit with Peruvians if you're in China.
Right. Sit with a national. How about that?
Okay.
Sit with a national. So if you're married, don't sit with your wife. You know, the agreement that my wife and I have is, you know, when we're in church, I'm at work. And so, you know, and you're at work and we're there to help people and serve people. And when you're in language school and learn the language, you know, every now and then, okay, sit with your wife, but maybe find a national lady that you can sit with and have her point out the Bible verses to you and just sit with her. You know, if you're a man, find a guy to sit with, find a young man to sit with. I don't know what it's like in the rest of the world, but I know that with Peruvians, just with you sitting with them, that says a whole lot to them. And it starts developing a friendship and nearness. And so, you know, if you're, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I always sat with my wife, but I always had somebody sit beside me. So I think I mean, I agree. David's right. Alberto or somebody sat beside me. And I elbowed them all service long saying, where are we? Where are we? And I would ask him to show me. And then I'd write a word down and he would look at me and he'd X the word out and tell me that wasn't a word. So yeah, sit with somebody. I love that. Did you want to say something else, David?
All right. Find somebody to sit with. I heard another missionary say that once he got further along in his language learning, that he sat in the back of the room. He sat on the last row and he would try to mimic the phrases and how the preacher would preach. And he would kind of mumble to himself and kind of mimic the pronunciation, try to mimic how he said it. And apparently from what I've heard is that he was incredibly good at his language. And so those might be some things that could help. Take a notebook, write down words that you know, write down words that you don't know, continually, anything that you can catch. The last thing I would say is, you know, when you're in language school, you're not going to church to be fed. And so, you know, you might be frustrated because in church you're not being fed. But really, you're not going to church to be fed right now. You're going to church to learn. And so your goal needs to be like a game. You know, maybe you sit down and when you're brand new in language school, you go, I'm going to write down 2 words that I know, you know, and then write down all the rest that I don't. And then the next church service go, I'm going to try to get 4. I'm going to go try to get 5. I'm going to try to get 10. And believe me, it is boring. I have so many missionaries that fall asleep during my message. I don't think it's because of my preaching, but it could be. But they're at least falling asleep because of the language. But make it a game. Make it a game that you're going to learn. That you're going to learn and you're writing down new words.
Let me just say this to you. I don't think you should go to sleep while you're in language school, because if you're constantly getting the national to help you figure out what words are and find the verses, what I used to do in Peru, I would print out my sermon outline in Spanish and give it on a piece of paper to everybody when they showed up. So I'd hand it to them in Spanish. Sometimes I emailed it to them earlier and they could look up words. But don't make yourself learn to sing. Austin's right. Get a songbook, learn to sing. Mimic them. David's so right about that. Mimic how they're doing things. Make sure the pastor knows you're not making fun. Go pray with them. Learn a prayer immediately that you can repeat. I remember one night in language school, I'm at church, and church isn't language school at all, but I go there all the time. And I was reading my prayer every week. And one day Alberto reaches over and grabs my prayer, wads it up, and says, "Just pray." And I was okay. And when I got through praying, there's like 25 men in the room. They all started clapping for me. And my prayer was horrible. And my prayer usually went something like this: Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. I hope that you will bless us, bless this church. Amen. And of course, I've asked you to memorize 2 verses a week. Our time is flying. So let me ask a couple more questions if I can. How do you continue to progress in the language and continue to work on it after language school is over?
Austin. I think it's important to constantly have an attitude of there's more to learn, and I'm going to continue to maintain my curiosity towards the language, and I'm going to continue to kind of humbly just realize that there's so much more to learn. You know, I mean, even now, like even with so all this stuff going on in Russia and Ukraine right now, I mean, I am learning in English and in Chinese about all these different weapons and all of these different things as I watch videos on YouTube and stuff, and just talking it out and I learned how to say NATO in Chinese. I learned so I'm just like constantly learning stuff, um, and it's never done, but just kind of, you've got to realize that there's always something new to learn. Make it fun. Since I'm kind of the nerdy guy who grew up playing video games, and I played those games where you always try to like level up your character or whatever. That's kind of how I did it in China mentally. I just kind of was like, if I learn, I mean, I never had like a set thing, but like in my mind, if I just learn more words, more phrases, then my Chinese is going to level up and improve and get better. And it wasn't like there was necessarily a finish line on that. I mean, there was the goal of, I want to be able to preach in Chinese, which my 4th or 5th year in China, I finally had a couple of opportunities to preach. And that was huge for me, because it was like, okay, like I'm not necessarily good at it, but I've done it. And so now what? And, constantly forcing myself to think in the language. Obviously the best thing is to have people around you that, and that you're going to do stuff with. But even when nobody's around, I remember I had, a bench and some dumbbells at my place. And so when no one else was around and I was working out, I would intentionally just in my head count reps in Chinese. I could have done it in English, but I was like, no, I'm in China, and I'm just gonna get my brain to start thinking in Chinese.
Hey, man.
Honestly, it would have been better to invite a Chinese guy over to my place and us work out together, but I didn't do that. And so the next best thing was at least count reps in Chinese. And so just internalize it and constantly get after it and try to learn new stuff. And I mean, even over the last couple of years, having opportunities to occasionally teach some of these pastors in China over Zoom, that's really stretched my Chinese a lot. Thinking not just so much like basic, like gospel type words, but like more advanced, like theological concepts and stuff. And teaching some of that in Chinese has really stretched and grown me, and has been really helpful for my language.
I think that is absolutely wonderful. And those of you watching, David's been having a little bit of internet problems, but he's back with us. I would like to tell you, nobody will listen when I say this, but read your Bible, memorize 2 verses a week, write down everything you can at church, get where you can write down the outline, watch the news for 15 or 20 minutes, because those guys, they speak very correctly in the language usually. Watch a program produced by them, with them in their language. Like, don't just watch dubbed American, because you won't learn as much culture. And the cultures are vastly different, in my opinion. And then I want everybody to buy a newspaper, a literal physical newspaper every day. In Peru, they walk down the street and they holler about the newspaper. And when I was with a friend on the field, he said, yeah, I look at the newspaper electronically. And he said, yeah, I understand it. And we're never looking for what we understand. We're always looking for what we don't understand. And so I said, we went and bought a newspaper, and I'd sit at lunch with him and I would read, and I said, tell me what that says. And he said, I gather. I said, I don't want to hear I gather. You get a dictionary. And I always tell people, don't use Spanish English dictionaries unless you absolutely have to. That's the last dictionary to ever go to. Use a Spanish to Spanish dictionary. Do you remember in English when we were kids? Maybe they don't do it anymore. But I would say to the teacher, how do you spell this word? She'd say, look it up in the dictionary. I'd say, I can't spell the word. And she'd say, look it up in the dictionary, you'll figure it out. And so I had to go look it up in this big dictionary, and that taught you so much. And so like when you look up, I was talking with a guy this past week about Spanish, and he was telling me what a word meant. And I said, technically, it can be used that way because that's slang. But here, and I gave him the dictionary definition. And he said, I never learned that, never heard that. So I personally think a newspaper every day or 5 days, 6 days a week, and take 15 minutes and just find words you don't understand. You confuse yourself and go places. When I was with, and you got to get people to help you by not being so nice. I was with my buddy, and we were on the night before the big final exam. He asked me if I would take them 4 hours away to another city to watch a soccer game. And I said, I can't. I have my big test tomorrow to graduate from language school. And he said, look, it's 4 hours over there and it's 4 hours back. And by the time we'll be at the game for about 4 hours, he said, you have 12 hours with a whole truckload of Spanish people. And he said, what better way to prepare for your test? And I said, that doesn't make one bit of sense. So we drove 4 hours over there. We got there. I couldn't find the stadium. And so I was asking him, he couldn't figure it out. He said, stop and ask. And we stopped at an intersection. And I asked the guy, and I didn't understand one word of his Spanish. It was a different city. They have a different accent. And I looked at my friend and I said, what'd he say? He said, ask him what he said. I said, you understand him? He said, you're never going to learn if you ask me. So I had to turn around and ask the other guy. I mean, just put yourself in uncomfortable. That's what David said at the very beginning. Stretch your comfort zone. All right, I've got one more question. But you guys got anything else?
I was just going to add a couple of things. A lot of missionaries that I've seen, they've changed their settings on their phone to Spanish. They've changed their settings on their computer to Spanish, and they've changed their settings on everything that they run to Spanish, which I think is a great thing. I keep my phone in English. I really don't need to learn any more of phone settings in Spanish, but I think that's a great thing. I do have stuff on my computer, including logos in Spanish, stuff like that, because I just want to get familiar with how to explain it to other people. Something that my wife, I think, is a great piece of counsel for my wife is that she said the way that she knows whether or not she should do something is if she doesn't want to do it or she knows it's going to make her uncomfortable, she goes, that's the first indication to tell me that I should do it. And she says, whatever makes me uncomfortable, whatever I don't want to do, I've got to push through that and just do what I don't want to do. And so that's a big, big deal.
I want to add this to you. When you're studying for messages in your foreign language, if you don't use the National Bible, the language Bible, don't use English. Word order is different. Even words are different. And that's very hard on some people that are extremely King James, because they're like, no, it has to be just like King James. No, the King James isn't found in Spanish. He never spoke Spanish. And even commentaries, it's good to read a commentary written by a Spanish person because his mind works differently. And Katie just sent this to me. She said, this isn't so much a question, but reading in Spanish is really helpful, like you're saying. I knew pretty good conversational Spanish, but when I began reading, I learned words I would have maybe never heard or known to use. When I started reading in Spanish, and what stretched my vocabulary so much, and I learned more intelligent sounding vocabulary. That is a 100%. I agree with that. All right. Final things before I ask one more question. Anybody? Question. Do you find that grammar issues and speaking like a foreigner will hurt your church growth and ministry because people don't want to hear you speak or preach?
100% yes.
Probably Chinese is unique because there's not near as many grammar technicalities in Chinese. There's no verb tense, there's no declensions or anything like that. But I mean, there is grammar, there is word order and all of those things. Yeah, I would imagine that it would. As close as you can get to speaking like they do, it's only going to help. It's only going to help.
I would just say, all right, so, all controversies aside, would you rather in English hear someone, a foreigner that works at a gas station, preach to you, or Ravi Zacharias preach to you? Which one of the two would you rather hear? And you can have an accent. You're never going to get rid of your accent. You're never going to be a native speaker like them. You're always going to have an accent. So let's forget the idea of I don't want to have an accent. But you can learn through phonetics and through pronunciation and through grammar to speak correctly. And so, the question is, would you rather sit and listen to somebody, and I'm not trying to be stereotypical or anything, but let's talk about somebody that works at a gas station, a foreigner that just moved to the States, and they know English. But when they ask you how your day has gone, or if you want to add something on, you don't understand a word they're saying. Would you want to sit down and listen to them for 30 to 40 minutes, talk to you about the importance of eternal life? Like, we need to take into consideration that the message that we have is the most important message in the entire universe, and it's the message of the gospel. And so if we are cluttering it and dirtying it with the way that we speak because of a lack of effort or a lack of practice, then we're doing a major disservice to the gospel. And so we've got to remember that. And by the way, preaching and public speaking is the height of language. Like, to be able to speak to somebody for 30 minutes is one thing. To be able to speak uninterrupted and follow your own train of thought for 30 minutes is the height of speaking a foreign language. And so you cannot think that the gospel is not going to be impeded by terrible language learning.
Well, got to end, but I want to add what David said too, and Austin said. I believe that grammar issues and speaking like a foreigner destroys your preaching. I think that I want to know slang. I want to know how they talk. I want to watch them on TV. I want to watch them, go to the mall and sit somewhere where you can watch them. They have a way of interacting. You'll never be as good as them, but if you learn to think like they think, in English, and just a really dumb example though, the American says why, in Spanish it is house white, not White House. And the American's like, why do they have to be backwards like that? The very thought that the American way is the better way just ruined it. Jesus took 30 years to become one of us, so much that no one realized he wasn't one of us. Now, he didn't need 30 years. I'm not talking about his deity here, but Jesus became so Jewish that everyone thought he was a normal Jew. And then when he spoke Jewish. Austin made a tremendous point. Maybe didn't pay attention. I never even thought of what he said, but Jesus spoke to Paul on the road to Damascus in Hebrew. That's what Austin said. I'm going to check him out on that. I mean, I thought that was fantastic. So you've got to hang around people. You got to find somebody that helps say, no, we don't say that way. And you got to work on it. It's fun. It's fun. One sentence from each of you before I do some close-up work here. Anything you want to say?
Come to Peru if you want to learn Spanish.
All right. Austin, anything?
I would say just to echo what you just said, have fun with it. And when you have fun with it, you'll find that it's easy. And it sounds crazy to say that learning a language is easy, but when you have fun with it and when you're enjoying it, it really can be fun. It can be enjoyable. It can be something that you look forward to doing. I mean, I learned Chinese. I think anyone who would want to could do the same. I mean, we know plenty of others who have learned Spanish, who have learned French, who have learned all these other languages, and it's doable. And just enjoy it, have fun with it. And it'll open up a whole new realm and way of seeing the world, and so many more people that you'll be able to communicate the gospel to, by being able to speak a new language.
I think personally, this has been good for you language learners to listen to. I still consider myself a student of Spanish. I don't think I've learned it well. I often will watch, if I'm going to Peru, I will turn on Netflix and I will find Spanish movies made by Spanish people in Spanish. I'll put on subtitles and I'll watch them for hours to get my mind used to churning all the time in Spanish, since I'm out of it, as much as I'm out of it. And but I want to say this to you. Those of you who run a language school, stop making it work. Stop making it work. Let them do their language school and then let them play the other hours. Guys, you've heard how to play. Austin Teal, I'm not trying to brag on anybody, but he knows characters. If he sat in my Sunday school class for a long time, and he always had a Chinese Bible there. He could read those characters. He didn't go to language school, but he worked at it, but he did substitute language school. So do the language every way you can. Guys, don't make it work. Get out and play, have fun. Don't overstress yourselves. Take a little vacation on the weekend, go to another city and rent a motel, one where you have to speak the language. And learn another way of talking, said the same thing. Anyway, I got to let us go. I've never kept us this long. Any day now, I don't know when Lanning does all the hard work here, but you'll be getting an email. We're going to take a journey of gratitude. If you want to, you get an email. You have to sign up for it. There'll be 7 messages, 1 a day for 7 days, on how to have an attitude of gratitude. The journey to an attitude of gratitude. And so I hope you might get involved in it. I hope you'll tell other people about this. Get other people to join in the society with us. And in 2 weeks, I already have the topic ready, but I just lost it in my train of thought. I'm going to talk to you in 2 weeks with a whole nother lesson. And in two more weeks, it'll be Mo Proctor and Chris Gardner and I. We're going to discuss not twisting scripture on the mission field. I want to thank all of y'all for being with us today. Austin, David, thank you very much. You've done a great job. I just personally think it's been a lot of help. And I thank all of you for being with us. And God bless y'all.